If you like The Witcher in any of its forms, it's likely that you've heard this phrase before. It's the most quotable phrase in the books, mentioned in the games, used in the TV show and repeated to exhaustion as a badass and profound one-liner by people that think they're edgy. As much as it is repeated, however, I find that few people actually understand what it means for Geralt, and as a consequence, few understand him in general. But before getting into that, and since most people know him from the Wild Hunt, I think it's important to talk about what CDProjekt did with him. Coming from someone who decided to read the entire 8 books because I wanted to play the games, I find that they essentially succeeded in keeping not only Geralt but the whole world true to its nature. Except for some plot points that are forgotten to make the story work, but that's not the end of the world. The most important thing they accomplish is that anytime you're not controlling what Geralt says or does, he acts just like Geralt. Though obviously some differences do arise with some of the choices the game gives you. As everybody knows, one of the most celebrated aspects of the game is how CDProjekt succeeds in selling you the idea that there are no good or bad decisions, just what you consider to be the lesser evil. However, due to the size of the game, it was impossible for that idea to be executed perfectly in every quest. There are quests where the choices feel forced at best, and in the worst cases, the characters seem to be acting completely against their nature. But taking into account the liberties one has to take to make a game, it does feel like Geralt and all the other characters really are the same as in the books. For almost the entire 400 hours it took me to complete them. But the reason I make this video is that in my opinion Geralt's character is severely misunderstood, even more so by people who have read the books actually. I find it hard to find discussions about the books that I don't fundamentally disagree with, and this can all be traced back to the most important short story in the first book, The Lesser Evil, where the "evil is evil" quote comes from. As I said before, this is the quote used to represent Geralt, and it declares exactly how he thinks of himself. He's a monster hunter that works for money, he doesn't care about morality or other people's problems, and he simply won't get involved or choose anything at all, that's it. So, that begs the question, why does he do the opposite just 12 pages later? There's a lot of things explicitly said in the books that are simply misinformation, or inaccurate stereotypes that come from biased perspectives. Things are rarely straightforward, and that is to be expected since this is a subversive postmodern take on the fantasy genre. And having a morally great killing machine as the protagonist seems like a perfect fit for that type of story. But there's something even more subversive you can do with that setting, and that's having a hero as the protagonist. There's a key word in understanding Geralt, and that is contradiction. Believe me when I say no one lies or changes his mind more about Geralt than Geralt himself. It's an internal battle between him as a person and him as a Witcher. As you probably know, Witchers are orphans that are torturedly trained and physically mutated with herbs since childhood to be monster hunters. They are taught to only work for money, only kill monsters, and be neutral to all other affairs. They have cat-like eyes and are often covered with hideous scars, 2 of the reasons why they are feared and treated with disgust by people. It's a path they didn't choose, but they don't know anything else in life at that point. Then you have Geralt as a person, someone who he hides really well. Just to give an example of who he is, there's a reason why CDProjekt is able to give Geralt all that funny and sarcastic dialogue. You see him bantering with generals and kings, and there are a lot of quests where the joke is that Geralt has to deal with some stupid or racist peasant. All of this despite having no formal education and being just a humble Witcher. One wouldn't expect to find out that the reason why he seems to know about everything and why he's so witty with words is that he's a romantic. He spent years reading anything he could find just with the hope of impressing Yennefer and have things to talk about with her. Mages are the most educated class in the Witcher world, and Geralt didn't think he stood a chance with her because any other mage had just so much more to offer intellectually, so he just began reading a lot. All the stereotypes about Witchers he has to face on his daily life actually cause him to be quite insecure, and that can be traced back to the story he tells of his first monster kill. There's a scene in the first book where Geralt is recovering from a battle with a monster and he's kinda conflicted on what to do with his life. He approaches a young nun named Yola that made a vow of silence, and he pretends that they are having a conversation, that she's asking him questions. He eventually talks about what he wanted to do after completing his Witcher training, and he says that what he wanted more than anything was to meet his first monster. As you can see, this quote that he says right here is completely at odds with the "evil is evil" quote that he will say later on. Not long after he left, he did encounter his first monster. He says that it was bald and had rotten teeth, and that he was a human. He was the leader of a group of deserters that had stopped a peasant and his daughter on the road. The leader wanted to take advantage of the peasant's daughter. Geralt easily killed the man, and both the deserters and the peasant ran away, terrorized by the sight of the Witcher. And the daughter, now covered in the blood of the bald man, fainted. He then discovered that he was feared and treated with disdain in every village he visited, and eventually any hope he had of being a hero disappeared. The fact that witchers are not rich means that, unlike knights, they need money, so they can't help people for free, and that contributed to the myth that they have no feelings. All the scars, blood, and the mutated eyes also didn't help. Geralt had no choice but to embrace what he had been taught and become what others thought of him. And that's what he does mostly in the short stories. He stumbles around doing his job, denying that part of him until he breaks and dares to hope of more for a few moments, and then repeats the cycle when it doesn't work out. Now that finally gets us to the lesser evil, which is one of such cases. The story starts with Geralt trying to collect the reward on a monster he killed near a village. The chief of the village informs him that while some people had gone missing, no one imagined that it was caused by a monster, so in short, there is no reward. The chief suggests to Geralt that he should try to sell the carcass to a mage that moved into town. The mage, Stregobor, receives Geralt in his tower and tries to convince him to help him with a problem he has instead. It turns out that some years ago a mage predicted that any princess born on a certain eclipse would be cursed to bring death and destruction to the world. Stregobor, among other mages, hunted and killed the princesses, trying to study them for signs of the curse, but one of them, Renfri, got away, surviving numerous murder attempts. She then became the leader of a group of mercenaries that are now in town with the intention of killing Stregobor. Stregobor wants Geralt to kill Renfri because, as he sees it, she's a monster and it's the lesser evil. This is where Geralt says the quote, proclaiming that he simply doesn't care and also that he doesn't believe in the curse. Despite this, Geralt can't resist the urge to intervene and he finds Renfri in the town inn. He tries to convince Renfri to leave town, but then she tells Geralt her side of the story, how she was haunted and all the torments she had to go through to survive. Then she asks him to kill Stregobor, because in her words, he's the monster that started everything, and it would be the lesser evil, though she doesn't explain why. Geralt declines once again, but unlike with Stregobor, he does feel sympathy for what she went through. He tells her, as if he's talking to himself, that she doesn't have to become what others think of her, that she isn't a monster and that letting go of revenge is how she can prove it to everyone and to herself, even if Stregobor deserves to die. To this, she says that she can't forget what Stregobor did and that she will do anything to make him leave his tower. In the morning, Geralt realizes her plan. She plans to take a large number of villagers hostage and kill them until Stregobor is forced to come out of his tower. Once again, Geralt intervenes, deciding that he can't allow her group to kill innocent people. So he chooses the lesser evil. He kills the entire group, including Renfri, in the middle of the town. After the fight is over, Stregobor appears and asks Geralt to bring Renfri's body to his tower so that they can perform an autopsy and confirm if the curse was real. Geralt takes out his sword once again and points it at Stregobor, saying he will not allow it. Content with the outcome regardless, the mage leaves the town, not having to seclude himself in his tower out of fear anymore. Immediately after Stregobor leaves the scene, the villagers start throwing rocks at Geralt upon seeing the massacre that had occurred. The story ends with Geralt leaving the town. There's a lot to analyze here, but perhaps the most obvious conclusion we can take away from that short recap is that the point of the story isn't to uphold the lesser evil quote, but to tear it down. Both Renfri and Stregobor tried to convince Geralt to kill the other, and he gave the same answer to both of them, saying that he doesn't believe in a lesser evil. But the reason for that answer is different in both cases. The answer to Stregobor is often interpreted as Geralt being neutral, as a matter of him not caring about the problems of others, but that is immediately contradicted when he looks for Renfri at the inn. If he didn't care, he wouldn't have gone looking for her, so his answer to Stregobor is actually a matter of Geralt not believing him to be right. And that's why the answer to Renfri is different. He does sympathize with her and think that Stregobor deserves to die, at least more than her, but he still says that he doesn't believe in lesser or greater evils, and that is because he believes that there is still time for good, for Renfri to rebuild her life and prove that she isn't a monster by foregoing revenge. These are the two sides of Geralt at play in each answer, the indifference and the desire to bring good into the world. He's trying to convince Renfri, who is accused of being a monster, to have a somewhat happy ending where she proves that everybody was wrong about her. And he does that to prove to himself that he too can have that outcome where the mutant becomes the hero. But at the end, Renfri isn't strong enough as she falls prey to all the pain she had to endure in her life. So Geralt must now choose between one of the two sides. When confronted with a situation where good is no longer an option, will he choose indifference or the lesser evil? As you see, he does choose the lesser evil. Despite the disappointment in Renfri's decision, he still doesn't give up on his drive to help people. He ends up killing the person he believed deserved to live, to the benefit of the person he believed deserved to die, but only because he couldn't let the greater evil happen. He couldn't allow the innocent people to die. That is why he doesn't let Stregobor take Renfri's body, because he just can't let Stregobor get away with more than he already did. Then Geralt leaves the town, with less money than he had before, hated by the people he saved, and with a unique name, the Butcher of Blaviken. All that the townsfolk ever saw was that a witcher filled the marketplace with the blood of 7 people. These are all quite abstract ideas, so a retelling of the story isn't always enough to provide all the context necessary to understand the point. The way everything is narrated in the book is obviously more subtle. For example, when Geralt prevents Stregobor from taking Renfri's body, the narrator mentions that someone the witcher didn't know found the hilt of his sword and drew it. And that line gives you a ton of context on Geralt's mental state at that point in his life. It tells you that he's been on the path acting like a witcher for so long now that he has almost forgotten his true self. Saving a group of innocent villagers doesn't require much thought, it's almost instinctive, but preventing Stregobor from taking Renfri's body is something that goes completely against the cold and rational witcher. He is essentially threatening a mage over a pile of massacred organs, no much different than the carcass of the monster he was previously trying to sell to the same mage. And that parallel isn't a coincidence. It tells you that despite what Renfri intended to do, which was something worthy of a monster, Geralt still saw her as a person. He understood that what she had to go through was not fair, but also that her plan definitely wasn't fair for the villagers, and ultimately that it wouldn't have been fair for Stregobor to get what he wanted. The person who found the hilt and drew the sword was that Geralt from long ago that wanted to make the world a better place. I know all this may sound corny, but that's part of why he's such a great character. As I mentioned before, these books subvert the tropes of the fantasy genre, and that includes the hero protagonist. It comes naturally that the protagonist should be an anti-hero, and that's what Geralt is on a surface level, but the author gave the character another twist by making him a hero that thinks he's an anti-hero. So much so that he has even part of the audience fooled. CDProjekt understood this, so they never force you to make straight up just morally bad choices, they just give you the ability to do so. Personally, I wasn't always satisfied with the choices because at some point they either felt too good/evil or just too forced into being evil/worse. But that's not a problem with how they understand the characters, it's just a matter of having to limit the possible outcomes because they can't account for every single possibility. The Reason of State quest is the worst offender in this matter because there's just no way Dijkstra is dumb enough to confront Geralt in open battle. And the only choices the game gives you are to either sacrifice Vernon, Bess and Thaler or kill Dijkstra, so you really don't have a choice, they both suck for no reason at all and not in a good way because it's just so forced. I think at some point they realized that the balance on these questions is hard to get right, so they tried something different in Blood and Wine, where instead of asking the player what would you do, they ask what do you think Geralt would do. Of course you still have your morality-based decisions to progress the plot, but then you also have these 2 specific moments where the game forces you to reflect on what you think of this character that you have spent at least 100 hours with. One of those moments, and I think the most interesting one, is when Regis asks Geralt if he would choose to be a Witcher. I say that because it's a genuinely good question that makes you reflect on a lot of aspects of his character, and both answers are truly valid. Taking into account everything we know about his past, one can believe that he could say no, because being a Witcher completely alienated him from his true self for a long time, thanks to all the inhuman treatment he receives on the daily. But on the other hand, he could say yes, because being a Witcher has given him the ability to bring so much good into the world, even if no one else perceives it and everybody hates him. It then becomes a question of what is stronger, the sorrow he feels or his desire for good. During the Lesser Evil story, we can see that there is still some Geralt left, but that's not the lowest point of his life. Things get more complicated for Geralt in the second book, as he continuously puts himself in deadly situations because of how beaten he feels. In another short story, Geralt gets scammed by a greedy town mayor, and to top it all off, he discovers that Yennefer, the only source of inspiration he has in the world, is thinking of leaving him for a mage she once dated. The mage, Istred, meets with Geralt and tries to convince him to leave Yennefer so that she doesn't have to choose between the two of them. Istred tries to paint his position as merely logical, saying that Geralt knows deep down that a mutant like him is just a toy to Yennefer and that he is incapable of real emotions thanks to the mutations he went through. After so many years of hearing that myth and being treated as if he had no emotions, he started to believe it to be true, which is ironic because this is easily Geralt's most emotional time. At the end, his insecurity causes Yennefer to decide to leave him, and this is one of the lowest points in his life. Thinking Yennefer chose Istred over him, Geralt challenges the mage to a fight to the death, and while Geralt can't be beaten in a sword fight, any mage could easily kill him with a single spell. He's almost certainly guaranteeing his death here, and Istred accepts his proposal for the next day. After this, Geralt goes to get drunk at an inn. With several drinks on him, he speaks to the leader of a band of thieves. Geralt sets himself up to be ambushed by the thieves in an alley that night, with the hope of being killed. In a poetic twist of fate, the thieves get scared when they notice the Witcher medallion while they were beating him, and they leave him in the mud. The leader of the thieves appears and tells Geralt to hang himself instead of involving others in his suicide. The next day, Geralt meets Istred for the fight. The visibly shaken mage announces that he will fight only using a sword, and not his magic, despite barely having any experience doing it. Istred had already received a letter from Yennefer saying that she was also leaving him. In response, Geralt refuses to fight, telling Istred to hang himself instead of involving others in his suicide. This is an example of why it is possible that Geralt would wish to never have become a Witcher, but there is something poetic in the fact that just when he tries to get killed, being a Witcher is what saves his life. You can interpret that in many ways, but at the end of the day, that's part of who he is. The good comes with the bad. He's always accomplishing his dream of helping people, but he also constantly suffers for it, to the point that he's beaten into thinking he's a heartless monster every time. The world of The Witcher is mostly hopeless and corrupt. There's no place for heroes in it. But even when in his mind he caves in to what the world tells him and he loses himself, he never becomes indifferent. His heart remains uncorrupted. It may even be the only uncorrupted thing in the whole world. The answer Geralt gives to Regis' question doesn't really matter, because Geralt lives in a world that is capable of making him think and say anything. The answer just depends on how low he is at that point. In one of the last chapters of the book, after accomplishing a great deal of things, Geralt hangs his sword on a display on a wall, saying that he's done with helping any other person and with being a Witcher, and that he will only focus on himself and his family for the rest of his life. But at this point you may be able to guess that just some moments later he grabs his sword once again to help people he doesn't know, because that's who Geralt is. That's the contradiction that lives inside him, and maybe it's okay for it to exist. Maybe Geralt isn't meant to understand himself. Maybe he's just meant to be, for the sake of all others. Sorry if it got a little bit sentimental there at the end, but I think it was necessary. After all, I am trying to convey the idea of heroism here. But that's enough. I will now end without any sentimentality. There's a very good quote that sums up Geralt much better than the lesser evil quote in my opinion, and that's this one. That's it. Also sorry for the accent and all other audio related issues, I will work on that. Be sure to subscribe if you thought any of this was interesting, because I will only commit to a video if I know I have something interesting to say that hasn't been said before, so it will be worth it. I love writing about video games, I have some ideas going around. I could also make a short video on how absolutely everyone in the whole world, including CDProjekt and Netflix, didn't understand Geralt's last wish, and I'd say that with complete and total confidence. But I don't want to talk just about The Witcher, I'm interested in a lot of things. Leave a comment if you have something to say, and that's all for today. Thanks for listening.